Not all stories end with answers. Some are swallowed by silence. Others leave behind too many clues, none of which make sense. A respected family man disappears, only to be found 1,000 miles away, dressed like a stranger. In another city, two women with nearly identical names are murdered days apart. Coincidence? Or the work of a killer who got it wrong, before getting it right? And then there's the man who drove for days, switching cars, changing cities, desperate to escape something he couldn't name, until his body turned up in a place he never belonged. These stories don't just defy explanation, they fight it. The Vanishing Lawyer, a Super Bowl Sunday riddle. Our first story plunges us into just such a labyrinth, beginning in the flat, windswept plains of the Mesa province, in a town called Dust Devil Creek. Here lived Daniel Lawson, a man whose life seemed as reliably structured as the legal statutes he navigated daily. An accomplished lawyer, respected by colleagues, cherished by his wife, Eleanor, and their bright-eyed 9-year-old daughter, Sophie. Daniel wasn't just successful, he was grounded. A devoted husband and father, the kind of man who spent his precious off-hours coaching Sophie's softball team or lending his legal expertise pro bono to local charities. His roots in Dust Devil Creek seemed deep, unshakable. Solid ground, indeed. Then came that fateful Super Bowl weekend in late January 1993. Eleanor and Sophie had planned a mother-daughter shopping trip to Capital City, a rare treat. Usually, Daniel would join them, making a long weekend of it. But this time, he demurred. The big game was on Sunday, the 31st, and he didn't want to miss it. A simple, understandable reason. Or so it seemed. So, Eleanor and Sophie left on Friday, waving goodbye to Daniel, who stood silhouetted in the doorway of their comfortable suburban home, promising to have dinner waiting upon their return. Nothing felt amiss. Nothing signaled the impending rupture. They returned Sunday evening, pulling into the driveway just as the last echoes of the Super Bowl faded from the airwaves across the nation. Tired but happy, they anticipated walking into the familiar warmth of home, finding Daniel perhaps cleaning up game day snacks or relaxing in his favorite armchair. Instead, an unsettling quiet greeted them. The television in the living room was still on, bathing the empty room in the flickering blue light of the post-game show, the volume turned low. Odder still, the small red light on the VCR glowed steadily. Recording. Daniel meticulously recorded major sporting events, a habit Eleanor often teased him about, but he always stopped the recording promptly. Why was it still running? Daniel? Eleanor called out, her voice echoing slightly in the stillness. We're home. Silence answered. A thread of unease began to weave through her fatigue. She walked through the house, Sophie trailing behind her, calling his name louder now. Nothing. In the kitchen, another strange tableau awaited. Sitting innocently in the center of the refrigerator shelf was a plate bearing two perfectly made turkey sandwiches, Daniel's go-to comfort food. Freshly made, by the looks of them, yet untouched, chilled. Why make them only to leave them uneaten? As Eleanor closed the fridge door, her eyes fell upon the countertop near the sink. Her breath hitched. Lying side by side, gleaming under the kitchen light, were Daniel's watch and his thick gold wedding band. He never took them off. Never. Despite the mounting strangeness, the humming VCR, the abandoned sandwiches, the naked countertop where his ring should be, there were no overt signs of alarm. No broken windows. No splintered doorframe. No overturned furniture suggesting a struggle. Nothing seemed stolen. Eleanor clung to rationality. Maybe he'd gotten restless and gone to watch the second half at a friend's place? Maybe he'd stepped out for a celebratory drink after his team won? He'd be back later, she told herself. He had to be. She stayed up for hours, watching the clock, straining to hear the sound of his car in the driveway. Eventually, exhaustion won, and she went to bed, leaving the porch light on, convinced he would be there in the morning. But morning dawned cold and empty. No Daniel. The unease from the night before had curdled into a cold, hard knot of fear. Eleanor called the police. Within 24 hours, they located Daniel's car parked downtown, near the courthouse he frequented. It was locked. Beneath one of the floor mats, officers found his house keys and car keys. Inside the vehicle, everything appeared disturbingly normal: his checkbook, credit cards, driver's license, all neatly in place. Nothing seemed missing. A quick check of his bank activity revealed something peculiar: a recent cash deposit of $5,000 into their joint account. Where had that come from? More confusing still, records showed he'd recently purchased 2 plane tickets, one from distant Sunset City to Capital City, the other returning from Capital City to Dust Devil Creek. Had he used them? When? The details were infuriatingly vague. Faced with these perplexing financial threads, Eleanor's carefully constructed calm finally broke. She told the police what Daniel had confided in her just weeks before his disappearance, his voice tight with a fear she hadn't fully grasped then. He believed he might be in danger. He was scheduled to give a deposition in Capital City later that month, a deposition involving his powerful old law firm, Sterling and Croft Associates, and one of their most formidable clients, the sprawling Omnicorp Industries. It was a nasty conflict of interest case, and Daniel, she explained, was being pressured, heavily pressured, to cover up certain wrongdoings. To fudge the truth. To protect the firm. "I can't do it, Eleanor," he'd insisted, his jaw set, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of deep anxiety. "I have to tell the truth, no matter who it hurts." He understood. She realized now that telling the truth could put a massive target on his back. A legal conspiracy wasn't just a plot point in a thriller, it felt terrifyingly real. The police were intrigued, certainly. A respected lawyer, a high-stakes case, pressure from powerful entities, it had all the hallmarks of foul play. Yet, there was no concrete evidence. No threatening notes, no documented confrontations, no witnesses to any overt coercion. It remained, officially, just a theory. Just Daniel's fear, relayed secondhand. And so, the investigation meandered. For 11 long months, detectives followed lukewarm leads, re-interviewed colleagues, searched for any trace, any sign of Daniel Lawson. Nothing. He hadn't used his credit cards. He hadn't contacted anyone. He had simply vanished. Eventually, lacking any evidence of foul play, the police concluded Daniel must have left voluntarily, succumbing perhaps to pressures unknown, and they closed the case. For Eleanor and Sophie, there was no closure, only the gnawing emptiness of absence and the frustrating feeling that the official story didn't align with the man they knew. Years melted into a decade of silence and unresolved grief. Then, in 2004, the case cracked open in the most unexpected way, thousands of miles away. Officer Miles Corbin, a state trooper in Cascade State, was idly browsing online databases of unsolved disappearances during a quiet night shift. An image flashed on his screen, a missing person's photo of Daniel Lawson from Dust Devil Creek, Mesa Province. Corbin froze. The face, it was identical to an unidentified John Doe hit-and-run victim from a cold case he vaguely remembered from way back in 1993. His pulse quickened. He pulled up the archive file. The date of the fatal accident, February 1st, 1993. The day after Daniel Lawson vanished. The location, a desolate stretch of highway in rural Cascade State, a staggering 1,600 miles from Dust Devil Creek. The John Doe had been dressed head to toe in military-style clothing, had no identification, no luggage, and had apparently been walking aimlessly when struck. Despite the immense distance and bizarre details, Corbin felt a certainty crystallize. He cross-referenced details. The John Doe file noted the victim wore glasses, the type precisely matched those in Daniel's photo. It was enough. DNA samples, carefully preserved for years, were compared. The result was irrefutable. John Doe was Daniel Lawson. The discovery answered the agonizing question of where Daniel had ended up. But it ripped open a Pandora's box of how and why. If Daniel had indeed been the one to hit record on his VCR after the Super Bowl ended, he had less than 24 hours to travel 1,600 miles without his car, without readily available funds, only to end up walking down a remote highway in military fatigues he didn't own, in a state where he had no known ties. How was that possible? Who supplied the clothes? Where was his own luggage? What sequence of events could possibly explain such a frantic, bizarre final journey? The official ruling remained unchanged: disappearance of his own accord, death by accident. But for Eleanor, for Sophie, for anyone who looked closely at the jagged edges of the case, the conclusion felt hollow. The stench of foul play, of a sophisticated legal conspiracy reaching across state lines, lingered heavily in the air, unresolved. Double tragedy in Bayou City, mistaken identity or tangled fates. The confirmation of Daniel Lawson's death closed one chapter but opened a volume of disturbing questions that remain unanswered, a chilling testament to how a life can unravel without reason. Sometimes, however, the threads of mystery seem deliberately tangled, as if part of a larger, more sinister design, as we now journey south, to the humid, sprawling metropolis of Bayou City, where fate, or something far darker, dealt two cruel and chillingly similar hands in the autumn of 2000. Our first glimpse into this unfolding tragedy centers on Maria Moreno. 48 years old, a competent and well-regarded loan officer at the downtown branch of Delta Financial, Maria lived a life marked by quiet routine and dependability. On the morning of October 12, a Thursday, she kissed her husband, Javier, goodbye, grabbed her briefcase, and headed out for work, just like any other day. The ordinary rhythm of their lives, however, was about to shatter. That afternoon, Javier tried calling her office line, then her cell. No answer. He left messages. Hours passed. Still silence. This was profoundly unlike Maria, a woman who always returned calls promptly. A tendril of worry began to coil in Javier's gut. By 5 p.m., with no word, the worry had blossomed into genuine concern. He called her direct supervisor at Delta Financial, hoping she'd simply gotten tied up in meetings. The supervisor's response sent a jolt of ice through Javier's veins. Maria hadn't shown up for work at all that day. They couldn't reach her either. Knowing immediately that something was terribly wrong, Javier contacted the Bayou City police. The gears of official procedure had barely begun to turn when a different kind of call came into the station. An ATV rider, exploring dusty back trails about 3 miles from the Moreno residence, reported spotting a smoldering vehicle half hidden in the dense undergrowth. It looked bad, he said, like there might be someone still inside the driver's seat. Grimly, officers were dispatched. They learned later that the fire department had received a call about smoke in that same remote area around 10 a.m. that morning but had dismissed it as a likely controlled burn, a common occurrence on the city outskirts. No one had investigated. When police finally reached the scene, the acrid smell of smoke and burnt metal hung heavy in the humid air. The car was a blackened, twisted wreck, the interior incinerated. Identifying the occupant seemed impossible amidst the devastation. But investigators painstakingly sifted through the debris, eventually recovering a single tooth fragment. Dental records provided the horrifying confirmation: the victim was indeed Maria Moreno. It quickly became apparent this was no tragic accident. The scene screamed homicide. Gasoline had been liberally doused throughout the car's interior and over Maria's body, intentionally maximizing the fire's destructive power. It felt staged, a gruesome attempt to obliterate evidence and perhaps suggest self-immolation or a fiery crash. The intense damage made determining an exact cause of death impossible. Was she already deceased when the fire was set, or did the inferno itself claim her life? Amidst the charred remains, some of Maria's personal effects were found, surprisingly intact. But one item was conspicuously absent: her wedding ring. Her family, her colleagues, the wider community, all were stunned. Maria was universally described as kind, unassuming, a woman without any known enemies. Who would target her? And why with such brutality? Javier was consumed by grief and a bewildering lack of answers. Then, the very next day, another bizarre element surfaced. An anonymous mail caller contacted the city desk at the Bayou City Chronicle. His message was brief, chillingly mundane: Maria Moreno's death, the flat voice stated. It was an accident. Before the reporter could probe further, the caller hung up. The call couldn't be traced. An accident? What could he possibly mean? Was it a cruel prank? A coded message? Or something else entirely? The cryptic call added another layer of disturbing ambiguity to an already horrifying event. And just as Bayou City was grappling with Maria Marino's violent demise, a parallel nightmare was beginning to unfold for another woman, living just miles away, who shared an eerily similar name. Marta Morales, 39, was a successful and highly competent nurse practitioner at a busy urban clinic. Known for her professionalism and generally amicable nature, Marta seemed to navigate her demanding career with grace. But recently, a shadow had fallen over her workplace. A new employee, a male nurse named Victor Martel, had begun making her deeply uncomfortable. His attention felt off. Intense. Possessive, almost. It culminated one afternoon when Marta returned to her desk after seeing a patient. Her blood ran cold. All the framed photos of her family, her husband Ricardo, their children, had been turned face down. And placed squarely in the center of her desk blotter was a single sheet of paper, bearing 3 stark words, "Death to her." Marta felt a visceral certainty that Victor was behind it, this petty, menacing act. But she had no proof. Just a gut feeling and a growing sense of dread. That evening, shaken, she confided in Ricardo. "I don't feel safe at work anymore, Rick," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "He gives me the creeps. Can you teach me how to shoot a gun?" Ricardo, though alarmed, eventually agreed. He took her to a range, patiently showed her the basics. Soon after, he purchased a small pistol for her protection. Marta began keeping it tucked beneath the driver's seat of her car. Just in case. A precaution she hoped she'd never need. For days after Maria Marino's body was discovered in the burnout car, and 3 days after that anonymous accident call to the newspaper, on October 16th, Marta Morales finished her shift and stopped at a local drugstore. As she walked down an aisle, a prickle of awareness ran up her spine. A man, unfamiliar, stood near the pharmacy counter, seemingly browsed but his gaze fixed unsettlingly on her. He didn't approach, just watched. Heart pounding, Marta pulled out her cell phone and called her best friend, Isabel. "Izzy, there's this guy here," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's just staring at me. It's freaking me out. What should I do?" Isabel advised her to wait him out, perhaps pretend to look at magazines near the front. But the man didn't leave. He just remained, his eyes tracking her movements. Finally, Marta decided she couldn't wait any longer. "Forget it," she told Isabel, forcing a casual tone. "I'm just going to pay and get out of here. I need to swing by the office quick to grab some files, but I'll be totally fine. Be home soon." She hung up, quickly paid for her items, and walked briskly out to her car, glancing nervously over her shoulder. 12 minutes later, a frantic 911 call was logged from Marta Morales' cell phone. Her terrified voice pleaded for help, choked with panic. "Someone's trying to kill me." The dispatcher reportedly heard sounds consistent with a struggle, maybe a gasp, then abrupt silence. The line went dead. Later that night, Marta Morales was found slumped in the driver's seat of her car, parked near her clinic. She was deceased, killed by a single gunshot wound to the head. The scene, like Maria Marino's, bore the hallmarks of staging. Her own pistol, the one Ricardo had bought her, the one she kept under her seat, was placed loosely near her hand on the passenger seat, a clumsy attempt to suggest suicide. None of her valuables were taken. Except one. Her wedding ring was missing from her finger. The parallels were too striking, too numerous to be mere coincidence. 2 women, Maria Moreno and Marta Morales, living in the same sprawling city. Killed just days apart. Both deaths brutally staged to look self-inflicted or accidental. Both victims missing their wedding rings. The whispers started almost immediately, coalescing into a terrifying theory. This was a professional hit gone tragically wrong. Marta Morales, the nurse practitioner who felt threatened, was the intended target all along. Maria Moreno, the bank officer, was a fatal case of mistaken identity. In this chilling scenario, the hitman realized his catastrophic error after killing Maria and made the anonymous call to the newspaper. It was an accident, perhaps as a coded message to his client, or simply a bizarre acknowledgement of the blunder. Then, a few days later, the mistake was rectified. The hit was carried out successfully on the correct target, Marta Morales. The missing wedding rings? Some speculated it was a grim calling card, a standard practice for contract killers to prove to their clients that the job was done. Investigators couldn't ignore the theory. They delved into Marta's life, inevitably focusing on her husband, Ricardo. Whispers of marital trouble surfaced. Ricardo had apparently accused Marta of cheating and was furious about it. His behavior following her death raised eyebrows. He reportedly refused a polygraph test and initially wouldn't allow police to interview their daughter. Adding to the suspicion was a hefty $700,000 life insurance policy on Marta, with Ricardo as the beneficiary. Motive, means, opportunity. It seemed plausible. Yet, despite the circumstantial red flags, investigators could find no concrete evidence linking Ricardo to his wife's murder, let alone Maria Moreno's. He was eventually ruled out as a suspect. What about Victor Martel, the coworker who had left the threatening note? His dislike for Marta was clear, but investigators found nothing to tie him directly to her death. He, too, was cleared. And there, the trail went cold. Two eerily similar murders, possibly linked by a deadly mistake, remained unsolved. No arrests were ever made. No charges filed. Just two families shattered, and a chilling coincidence hanging heavy over the humid Bayou City air. The paranoid traveler, a cross-country flight into oblivion. Two women, linked only by name and city, met violent ends days apart, their cases remaining cold files whispering of deadly errors or a chillingly precise, unknown motive. The fear of being targeted is terrifying, but perhaps more unsettling is the fear born from within, a paranoia that consumes and drives one towards an equally inexplicable doom, as we see in the bewildering final journey of Ben Carter, a man seemingly running from shadows only to collide with a brutal, baffling reality. Our story shifts north, to the misty environs of Maple Ridge, nestled in the Pacific Province, in the summer of 1996. Here lived 31-year-old Ben Carter. Ben's past held shadows, acknowledged struggles with substance abuse, battles fought and seemingly won. For the previous 2 years, he diligently put his life back together. He was sober, holding down a demanding job as a foreman for a local construction company, known on site as a generally cheerful, friendly guy. Easygoing. No known enemies. Life, it appeared, was solidly back on track. But that summer, something shifted. Dramatically. Abruptly. The easygoing demeanor fractured, replaced by what his mother would later describe as frequent and wild mood swings. Within weeks, Ben transformed. The relaxed foreman vanished, replaced by a man consumed by panic, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if expecting a blow. He couldn't sleep, tormented by anxieties he couldn't articulate. Or wouldn't. He began telling coworkers, his voice low and urgent, that he was fairly certain someone was trying to kill him. Their reactions were a mixture of concern and dismissal. "Ben, mate, you're not okay," one might have said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You really need to talk to someone. See a doctor." When his mother, worried by his increasingly erratic behavior and haunted eyes, confronted him, he grew evasive. "Mom, I really shouldn't tell you about it," he stammered. "About what, Ben? What's happening?" Her pleas met a wall of frightened silence. I can't say anything else, Mom." And that was it. A door slammed shut, leaving her outside with her fear. Ben's strange, spiraling behavior reached a critical point on Friday, July 5th. He walked into his bank and methodically withdrew every cent from his account, a total of around $6,000 in cash. He didn't stop there. He also emptied his safety deposit box, retrieving gold bars and jewelry accumulated over the years, worth thousands more. He bundled the cash and valuables together. Preparing for what? Flight? Or something else? 2 days later, on Sunday, he left his Maple Ridge home and drove his car the short distance to the northern border, crossing into the United States. He attempted to enter. Red flags immediately went up for the border agents. A single man, traveling alone, carrying a large amount of cash and valuables, visibly agitated and nervous, he fit the profile used to screen for drug traffickers. Entry denied. Frustrated and perhaps even more fearful, Ben turned his car around and drove back home. The very next day, Monday, he showed up at the construction site. Not to work, but to quit. He abruptly informed his boss he was leaving, effective immediately. Didn't even ask about his final paycheck. He simply turned his back on the life he had rebuilt and walked away. From the site, he drove straight to the airport. There, he purchased a round-trip ticket to Berlin, Germany, a city where he had briefly worked the previous year. The ticket cost him a hefty $1,600. His flight was scheduled to depart the following day, Tuesday. But Ben's frantic energy couldn't settle. Immediately after buying the ticket, almost as an afterthought, he seemed consumed by a sudden, desperate need to try crossing the border again. Right now. He rushed to the house of a female friend, arriving on her doorstep looking utterly disheveled, his eyes wide with panic. "They're trying to kill me," he pleaded, his words tumbling out. "You have to help me get across the border. They rejected me yesterday, but maybe with you, you've got kids, it'll look more convincing. Can you just drive me across? Please?" His raw terror spooked her. This wasn't the Ben she knew. Feeling deeply uneasy and unwilling to get entangled in whatever chaos Ben was caught in, she gently refused. Dejected, Ben returned home, apparently spending the rest of the day hidden away. Tuesday morning arrived, the day of his supposed flight to Berlin. Ben went back to the airport. But he didn't head towards the departure gate. Instead, he marched straight to the airline counter and requested a full refund for his ticket. Surprisingly, it was granted. His explanation to the agent? The person he was planning to meet in Germany had suddenly fallen ill, so the trip was off. The only person this could plausibly refer to was a woman he'd had a brief fling with during his work stint there the year before. Later, however, investigators would contact her. She confirmed she hadn't been in touch with Ben, wasn't sick, and was certainly not expecting him. The excuse was a lie. Another baffling piece in a rapidly disintegrating puzzle. Ticket refunded, Ben immediately walked to the airport car rental counter and rented a vehicle, a nondescript silver sedan. He got behind the wheel and, for the third time in as many days, drove towards the northern border. This time, for reasons unknown, he was successful. He crossed into the United States. He didn't head south immediately, though. He drove west, towards the coast, arriving in the bustling port metropolis of Seaport City. He navigated to the airport there, drove the silver sedan into the multi-level parking garage, parked it haphazardly, and simply walked away, abandoning it. He then went down to the airline ticket counters and purchased another flight, this time, an expensive one-way ticket to Capital City, on the other side of the continent. He paid $770 in cash, nearly double what a round-trip fare would have cost. Logic seemed to have deserted him entirely. That night, he boarded the plane. By Wednesday morning, Ben Carter was in Capital City. He deplaned, walked directly to the car rental desks again, and rented another vehicle, this time, a blue sedan. Without any apparent plan or destination, he got in the car and started driving southwest, logging mile after mile, heading deep into the Appalachian region. 500 miles later, he arrived on the outskirts of Stone Mountain City, Tennessee. A place where he seemingly knew no one, had no history, no reason to be. He wasn't spotted in Stone Mountain City until around 5:30 that evening. He pulled the blue sedan into a brightly lit gas station, looking flustered. He told the attendant, a grizzled older man named Gus, that his car wouldn't start. Gus came out to take a look. The problem was instantly, bizarrely clear. Ben was attempting to start the blue sedan, let's say it was a Toyota Camry, with the key to the silver sedan, the Nissan Altima, he had abandoned hundreds of miles away in Seaport City. Gus pointed it out, holding up the key. "Son, this here says Nissan. This car's a Toyota." Ben stared at the key in his own hand as if seeing it for the first time, confused. "No, this is the one I was using," he insisted vaguely. Together, Gus and a bewildered Ben searched the blue sedan inside and out. Pockets were emptied. No Toyota key. Ben ended up calling the rental car company, but their local office was already closed for the day. "Well," Gus said eventually, shaking his head, "reckon we'll have to get her towed. But look, there's a motel just up the road, the Mountain View Inn. I can give you a ride over there if you like." Ben, seeming lost in a drift, numbly accepted the offer. Just after 6 p.m., Ben Carter walked through the glass front doors of the Mountain View Inn. He stopped just inside the lobby, scanned the room, then turned abruptly and walked back out. A moment later, he walked back in. Then out again. Then in. Then out. The front desk attendant watched the strange, repetitive dance 5 times in total over the course of nearly an hour. When Ben finally approached the counter to ask for a room, the attendant noted his extreme state of agitation. He was drenched in sweat despite the cool evening air, his eyes darting nervously, constantly looking over his shoulder. He seemed totally paranoid, she later recalled, just totally on edge. He paid for the room in cash. She handed him the key card. He took it, glanced towards the elevators, and then, inexplicably, turned around one last time and walked back out the front door into the gathering dusk. He never went up to his room. He was never seen alive again. The following morning, Thursday, 2 construction workers arrived early at their job site, located directly across the street from the Mountain View Inn. As they pulled into the gravel parking area, their headlights illuminated something lying on the ground. A body. It was Ben Carter. He was partially undressed, inexplicably missing his pants, shoes, and socks. His shirt was rumpled. There were scratches on his hands and face, minor abrasions, nothing that looked life-threatening in itself. Scattered around his body, almost carelessly, was a significant amount of cash, nearly $4,000 in American, Canadian, and German currencies. Nearby lay the fanny pack he'd carried, still full of his valuable gold and jewelry. His black duffel bag, containing maps and receipts from his frantic journey, was also present. And there, lying on the gravel a few feet away, was the missing key to the blue sedan. The subsequent autopsy determined that Ben had died from a single, powerful, violent blow to his stomach. It had caused massive internal hemorrhaging. What object delivered the blow remained unknown. Toxicology reports came back clean, no drugs, no alcohol in his system. The only piece of potential forensic evidence recovered at the scene was as bizarre as everything else. A single, long strand of hair, not matching Ben's own, clutched tightly in his dead fist. Whose hair was it? That information, if ever determined, was never publicly released. There were no witnesses to the fatal assault itself. However, a security guard working at a nearby business later reported hearing a distinct woman's scream coming from the direction of the construction site around 3:30 that morning. Adding another layer of intrigue, police released a composite sketch of an unidentified man who had reportedly been seen talking with Ben outside a nearby home-style diner shortly after Ben had left the Mountain View Inn for the final time. This man was never identified. Investigators were left utterly baffled. Was Ben Carter telling the truth all along? Had someone, or multiple people, been relentlessly pursuing him across the continent, finally catching up to him in that lonely Tennessee parking lot? If so, why leave behind the cash and valuables? What was the motive? Or was the paranoia the driving force? Was Ben suffering from a profound psychotic break, his erratic behavior and fear attracting the wrong kind of attention, leading him to tragically cross paths with a random killer? The lingering question mark, when mysteries endure. Ben Carter's frantic journey across a continent ended violently in a place he had no reason to be, leaving behind a baffling scene and a final, unanswerable question. Was he running from a real threat, or from the shadows within his own mind? The truth, like Ben himself, vanished into the Tennessee dawn, another chilling entry in a ledger of the lost. And so, we are left with echoes. the lingering resonance of lives abruptly, inexplicably altered. We've walked the bewildering path of Daniel Lawson, the principled lawyer from Dust Devil Creek whose final, impossible journey across 1,600 miles ended on a desolate highway, clad in clothes not his own. We've felt the chilling synchronicity in Bayou City, where Maria Moreno and Marta Morales met violent, strangely similar fates just days apart, their staged deaths and missing rings whispering of fatal errors or terrifyingly precise, hidden motives. And we've traced the chaotic, fear-fueled odyssey of Ben Carter, whose cross-country flight from perceived danger culminated in a bizarre, fatal encounter in Stone Mountain City, leaving behind more questions than clues. What binds these disparate tragedies? It's not a lack of evidence, but often an abundance of it, clues that contradict, timelines that don't add up, motives that remain stubbornly obscure. These are the enduring mysteries where official verdicts, whether ruling a death an accident or simply consigning a case to the cold files, often feel unsatisfying, like ill-fitting garments draped over a truth far more complex and perhaps more sinister. These unsolved cases are labyrinths built from facts, where every turn intended to lead towards clarity only deepens the shadows. They highlight the stark limits of knowledge, the frustrating boundaries of investigation when faced with deliberate obfuscation or simply the chaotic randomness of human events. Why do such cold cases continue to fascinate, to burrow under our skin? Perhaps because they tap into a primal fear of the unknown, the unsettling recognition that reason doesn't always prevail, that sometimes chaos wins. They challenge our innate desire for resolution, for stories with neat conclusions. These mysteries endure because they refuse closure, leaving behind jagged edges and persistent, unanswered questions. And we must never forget the human cost, the families of Daniel, Maria, Marta, and Ben, left adrift in a sea of uncertainty, forever searching for answers that may never surface, forever living with the ghost of what happened. Their pain is the undeniable reality beneath the layers of speculation and intrigue. To offer definitive solutions here would be conjecture, perhaps even arrogance. The power of these stories lies not in answers we invent, but in the stark, uncomfortable questions they force us to confront. Some truths, it seems, remain stubbornly veiled, hidden by malice, incompetence, or the simple, terrifying fact that not all events yield to human understanding. The final question mark doesn't just sit in a dusty police file, it hangs heavy in the air, a persistent reminder of the vast, unsettling territories of the unknown that lie just beyond the familiar glow of our everyday lives. Perhaps it always will.